Gender is perhaps the most restrictive force in Indian, Asian or Western life and goes beyond the question of who must be in the kitchen and who must be in the house. Now, by house, I mean parliament, because as you know, in India, we've had this women's movement to ask for more representation of women in parliament. Candidates in Afghanistan, in Iran, in US, wherever I have worked, have also tried to do the same thing. In countries like Kuwait, they've also had to fight for the right to vote more recently. And what I find is that this is true across the board in Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, or even secular societies. In the West, a woman is groomed to accept that she may get fewer jobs or job opportunities than most men. She will also need to look after the children and cook and care for the home by herself, even if she's working outside like her male partner, may get lower wages than her male colleagues and hit a glass ceiling when it comes to promotions in jobs or politics. In India, women are unequal in more stark ways. A woman is not safe from the birth to death. She could be the victim of amniocentesis when she's conceived, of feticide when she's born, kept at home and given food last while her brother gets the best education and food, be married off as a child, might die of maternal mortality from early pregnancy, be widowed and thrown out of the house so that she would not inherit property, end up begging in our pilgrim towns and then simply fade away and die. Now this is of course the worst case scenario and it may not happen to one woman, but something of all of this may happen to any woman in India, and that is what I want to point out. In both Asia and the West, women are severely underrepresented in political parties, in state assemblies and in Senate, Congress or Parliament. Women get power in spite of their sex, not because of it. By desexualizing themselves, donning the mantle of daughterhood, widowhood, or simply by serving their husbands. In India, Mamata Banerjee represents the first category of someone who has to desexualize herself, not pretend that she's not a woman, shout, scream, never take up women's causes. Indira Gandhi, of course, represents the second, being the daughter, and Rabri Devi the third, of being the good wife. Hillary Clinton, Angela Merkel and Margaret Thatcher have faced similar challenges in the US and Europe. There are hundreds of women who do not want to play this role, but take this road to power as the winning formula. It's a moot point that while this may get more women in decision-making positions on one hand, it may also entrench patriarchy on the other. The other similarity of the experiences of Asian and Western women is that when they bring these issues to the table, they are invisibilized, marginalized or trivialized. An example is the pressure in India, the US and many other parts of Europe and of course in Asia and country after country including Afghanistan, of the women's movement to accept the normalization of the sexual exploitation as sex work, making it convenient for different states and governments to ignore the structural, social, economic and political policies that force women into prostitution. Many neoliberals even argue that these rapists actually help women earn an income by buying sex and therefore should not be punished by law. They ignore the fact that surely women have the right not to be dependent on such obliging men to earn a livelihood and instead be able to earn an income in an equal, dignified and sustainable way. And also that the bulk of this livelihood is actually that of the sex industry and the woman gets only a fraction. They focus on the word agency that women exercise within prostitution as a survival strategy, but ignore the fact that servitude is servitude, whether imposed or accepted. They never discuss the obvious fact that the man who buys the woman must have more agency than she does in terms of purchasing power or physical power through body penetration. I have often been asked, and most often by men, what about women who choose to be prostitutes? But nobody chooses to be born poor, nobody chooses to be born a girl, and nobody chooses to be born a low caste. But nobody asks why the choice between prostitution and hunger is considered a real choice. Is it to absolve our government of responsibility to its female citizens? What about the responsibility to ensure that female citizens get equal access to jobs and education as men do, so that prostitution is not the only option available for women? All of last month, while lobbying with MPs and marching on the streets and with MPs from all political parties for the implementation of the Verma Commission recommendations in the new rape law, I and other women's rights activists have been asked, and these are really absurd questions, but we've been asked by members of parliament. Do women's groups want to get into our bedrooms? Do we need to keep a piece of paper by our bedside before we have sex with our wives to get them to sign off on consent? Is looking wrong by looking them in voyeurism? Why is prostitution rape? Don't college girls do it to buy jeans and lipstick? If we make forced labor and services a form of exploitation, who will do the work? We will never get domestic workers or farm workers. What about the case of the woman who stripped her husband of all his assets and ran off with her lover? And the most asked question, what about women who put their husbands in jail on false charges? These questions and the reluctance to address squarely the urgency of the rape crisis in India, where 17 women are raped officially every day, simply demonstrates a fear that men feel based on their own guilt. The secret question lurking in their hearts is, what if women will treat us, as being men, as we have treated them? Even our testimonials when we testify in parliament or to the media or outside, that add weight to other movements around inequality, like movements against religious fundamentalism, caste, race or class discrimination, are taken less seriously. In Egypt or in Iran, where I lived for 7 years, initial reporting of the movement simply ignored the large contingent of women standing shoulder to shoulder with men asking for their rights. In Iran, in fact, women's images protesting on the streets against the Shah were actually obliterated from photographs and film footage in National Archives because they were not wearing the hijab. My own testimony as a Hindu woman in India to the Liberhans Commission of Inquiry set up by the Indian Parliament to investigate the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992 on the religious atrocities committed by Hindus against Muslim men and women was marginalized and pushed into the annexes of serious documents. On 6 December 1992, the Babri Masjid was demolished in India. I was covering the event for a magazine. While covering the event, I was nearly strangled to death and thrown into a ditch by supporters of the political party orchestrating the demolition. I deposed before the Press Council, the Bahri Tribunal and the Liberhans Commission on the role of L.K. Advani, one of the national leaders leading up to the destruction of the mosque. The moment I went public about the violence done to me, the failure of the political leader to act on it and his leadership of the very violence itself, I was subjected to hate mail and had to face character assassination through whisper campaigns. I was cross-examined fairly and unfairly by a battery of lawyers from this political party and its affiliate organizations like the RSS, the Bajrang Dal, etc., who tried to insinuate that I was a bad woman who smoked, cursed, acted in TV serials, did not feel ashamed about my lack of clothes, had many male friends, and was not feminine enough to be silenced by fear. All the insinuations served to create an image of a woman who deserved what she got. The questions in the Liberhans Commission of Inquiry were, you had been assaulted and your clothes were torn off. Despite that, you did not deem it proper to at first to change your clothes and then proceed Ram Katha Kunj where all the leaders were staying. The other question. Despite the extreme misbehavior, the attempt to kill you by throwing you into a ditch from which you were later rescued, you chose to proceed to Ram Katha Kunj Manch rather than leaving the site altogether out of fear. Have you ever acted in a TV serial or a drama? Did you see any other woman journalist smoking or saying anything derogatory at the spot? The disturbing fact is that and besides that, I was also asked that did I worship God, which God did I worship, did I have a photograph of any god or goddess in my house? The disturbing fact is that these questions were actually asked by lawyers representing a responsible political party whose members are in parliament. Such a party could never create or guard the rights of women. They would define laws for women based on the concept of good and bad women rather than on the principles of equality. Worse, the neutral judge in charge of the commission did not bring an end to this kind of misogynistic line of inquiry. An even greater betrayal was that he finally downgraded my testimony by simply annexing it to the report, though it was the only eyewitness account of the culpability of a national leader. The greater betrayal is that while the women's movement in India, Asia or elsewhere tries to locate itself in the social justice movement, in the New World Order, the very men who fight for equality on all other counts perpetuate the divisive fiction that protesting against sexism detracts from protesting against imperialism, globalization, capitalism, religionism, casteism, classism, or racism.